The first snow of the season had begun to fall upon London, gentle and unhurried, as if the sky itself was mindful of the late hour and wished not to disturb the city's rest. It settled upon the rooftops in a soft white blanket, muffling the usual sounds of the night until the world outside 221B seemed to hold its breath. The gas lamps along Baker Street burned with a hazy glow, each one a small island of warmth in the growing whiteness, and the occasional passing carriage moved with a hush, its wheels leaving dark tracks that were quickly erased. I stood at the window for a long time, watching the snow transform the familiar street into something new and strange. It was the kind of night that invited reflection, that softened the sharp edges of the world and reminded a man of simpler times, of childhood mornings and the first snowfall of the year. Behind me, the fire crackled and popped, and the clock on the mantelpiece ticked its steady, comforting rhythm. Holmes was in his chair, but he was not idle. He was engaged in one of his more peculiar experiments, heating a small quantity of dark liquid in a test tube over the flame of a spirit lamp. The smell that arose was not unpleasant, earthy and rich, like the floor of a forest after rain. "A new interest, Holmes?" I inquired, turning from the window. "An old one, Watson, newly revived," he replied without looking up. "The composition of various printing inks used in London newspapers over the past 50 years. You would be astonished at the variations. Each publisher, each decade, has its own signature. A fascinating record of industrial progress and economic necessity." I smiled and returned to the window. Such was my friend's mind. While I saw only snow and silence, he saw data, patterns, the invisible history written in every aspect of modern life. The knock on the door, when it came, was nearly lost in the soft hush of the falling snow. But Holmes heard it, as he heard everything. He set down his test tube and wiped his hands on a cloth, a look of mild curiosity crossing his features. "It is late for a visitor," he observed. "And yet, the knock is not urgent. Curious." Mrs. Hudson appeared a moment later, her expression one of gentle concern. "A young lady to see you, Mr. Holmes. She would not give her name, but she said you would see her. She seems troubled, poor thing." Holmes nodded, and Mrs. Hudson stepped aside to admit a figure who seemed to bring the snow in with her, so thoroughly was she wrapped in its chill. She was young, no more than 18 or 19, with hair the color of dark honey and eyes of a blue so pale they were almost gray. Her coat was damp with melted snow, and she wore no hat, no gloves, as if she had left her home in great haste without thought for the cold. In her hands, she clutched a small velvet pouch, held so tightly that her knuckles were white. Holmes guided her to the fire with gentle urgency, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders and pressing a cup of hot tea into her hands. She accepted these attentions in silence, her eyes fixed on the flames as if seeking something there. When at last she spoke, her voice was soft and trembling, like a violin string barely touched by the bow. "My name is Lily Marlow. I work as a seamstress in a shop near Covent Garden. I live with my grandmother in a small flat above a baker's shop. We have very little, but we have always been happy. Until a week ago." She paused, and Holmes waited, patient as the falling snow. "A week ago, my grandmother received a letter. It was from a solicitor, a Mr. Blackwood, whom she had never heard of. The letter stated that a distant relative had passed away and left her a small inheritance. Nothing grand, but enough to ease our lives. A few £100. She was overjoyed. We both were." Her voice caught, and she took a sip of tea to steady herself. "But there was a condition. The inheritance could only be claimed in person, at the solicitor's office, between the hours of midnight and 1 in the morning. Any other time, the offer would be void. My grandmother thought it strange, but she is old and trusting. She believed it was merely the eccentricity of a dead man." Holmes leaned forward slightly. "And did she go?" "She did. 3 nights ago. She dressed in her best clothes and took the omnibus to the address given in the letter. I wanted to go with her, but the letter specified she must come alone. She kissed me goodbye and promised to return within the hour. She set down her tea, her hands trembling. She did not return that night, nor the next morning. I went to the police, but they said I must wait 48 hours before filing a missing person report. I waited. I went to the address in the letter. It was a boarded-up shop, empty for years. There was no solicitor's office. There was no Mr. Blackwood. My grandmother had simply vanished. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the snow outside. "This is a grave matter, Miss Marlow," Holmes said quietly. "But I sense there is more you have not told us. Something that brought you here, to me, rather than waiting for the police." She looked up at him, and her pale eyes held a depth of fear that made my heart ache. "Because of what I found in her room. After she was gone, I searched everywhere for some clue, some explanation. And I found this." She held out the velvet pouch. Holmes took it gently and loosened the drawstring. He tipped the contents into his palm. It was a key. But such a key. It was made of brass, old and tarnished, and its handle was fashioned in the shape of a bird in flight. A swallow, perhaps, or a martin. Its wings were spread, its beak open as if in song. The shaft was long and slender, and the teeth at its end were cut in an intricate pattern I did not recognize. Holmes studied it in silence, turning it over and over in the firelight. His face was utterly still, but I knew him well enough to see the excitement kindling behind his eyes. "Miss Marlow," he said softly, "have you ever seen this key before?" "No, sir. Never. But I know what it opens." Holmes looked up sharply. "You do?" She nodded, and when she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "My grandmother used to tell me stories when I was a little girl. Stories about our family, about where we came from. She said that long ago, generations ago, our people were not seamstresses and bakers. They were something else. Something older. They were keepers." "Keepers of what?" "Of doors. Not ordinary doors. Doors between places. Between times, sometimes. She said there was a key, passed down through the generations, that opened a door that should never be opened except in the greatest need. She said the key was lost, long before she was born. She said it was just a story." Her eyes moved to the key in Holmes's hand. "But it wasn't a story. She must have found it. Somehow, somewhere, she found it. And now she is gone, and the key is here, and I am so afraid that she tried to use it. That she tried to open the door." Holmes was silent for a long moment, his gaze lost in the flames. The clock ticked. The snow fell. The fire crackled and settled. "Miss Marlow," he said at last, "I believe your grandmother is alive. I believe she is exactly where she intended to be. And I believe the key to finding her lies not in chasing after her, but in understanding what she was trying to protect." He rose and walked to his bookshelf, selecting a large, leather-bound volume. He brought it to the table and began to leaf through its pages, his long fingers moving with purpose. The swallow, or martin, is a symbol found in many ancient traditions. It represents the traveler, the one who returns. But in certain obscure texts, it has another meaning. It represents the guardian of thresholds, the one who stands between worlds and ensures that only those who are meant to pass may do so. He found his page and read silently for a moment. Here, a reference to a secret society, dating back to the Middle Ages, known as the Order of the Swallow. They were said to protect certain places, certain passages, that connected the ordinary world to something beyond. They were not priests or monks, but ordinary people, farmers and craftsmen, who passed the secret down through their families. He looked up. "Your grandmother's stories were not fairy tales, Miss Marlow. They were history. Family history. The key was not lost. It was hidden, waiting for the right moment, the right need. And that moment arrived a week ago, when a letter came from a man who did not exist, summoning her to a place that was not there." I leaned forward. "You think the letter was from the order? From whatever remains of it?" "I think," Holmes said carefully, "that your grandmother was called. Called to fulfill a duty that had been waiting for her all her life. The midnight hour, the empty shop, the vanished solicitor, these were tests, signs that only she would understand. She did not disappear. She stepped through a door that only she could open, with a key that only she possessed." Lily Marlow stared at him, her pale eyes wide with wonder and fear. "Then I have lost her," she whispered. "She is gone forever, into some other world, and I will never see her again." Holmes knelt beside her chair, his expression gentle. "No, Miss Marlow. You have not lost her. You have found her. Found her true self, her true purpose. And I believe, with all my heart, that she knew what she was doing. She did not abandon you. She protected you. By going alone, by leaving the key behind, she ensured that you would not be drawn into a world you were not ready for. He placed the key in her hands, closing her fingers around it. She left you this for a reason. Not as a burden, but as a promise. A promise that the door is not closed forever. A promise that when you are ready, when your own need is great enough, you will know where to find it. And she will be waiting on the other side. Tears streamed down the young woman's face, but they were not tears of despair. They were the tears of a grief that had found its shape, its meaning. "What do I do now?" she asked. "You live," Holmes said simply. "You live your life, fully and well. You become the woman your grandmother raised you to be. You keep the key safe, and you keep the stories alive. And when the time comes, you will know. You will simply know." She stayed by the fire until her tears had dried and her hands had stopped trembling. Then Holmes called for a cab, a rare expense, and insisted on seeing her safely to her door. He returned an hour later, snow dusting his shoulders and his hair, his face thoughtful and serene. He resumed his seat and took up his violin, but he did not play. He simply held it, his fingers resting lightly on the strings. "A strange case, Watson," he murmured. "Perhaps the strangest. A mystery with no crime, no villain, no resolution in the ordinary sense. And yet, a mystery solved, nonetheless." "Do you truly believe what you told her?" I asked. "About the door, about her grandmother waiting?" Holmes was silent for a long moment. "I believe in the human heart, Watson. I believe in the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of the world. I believe that love does not end, does not vanish, does not abandon. Whether there is a literal door, a literal other world, I cannot say. But I know that Lily Marlow will carry her grandmother with her, every day of her life. And that, in its own way, is a door that never closes." He drew the bow across the strings, a single, long, resonant note that hung in the air and slowly faded. The snow continued to fall, deeper now, transforming London into a city of silence and shadow. The fire had burned to embers, glowing soft and orange in the darkness. The clock ticked on, patient and unhurried. I thought of the old woman, somewhere beyond the reach of our world, standing before a door that only she could see. I thought of the key, resting now in the hands of her granddaughter, a promise carved in brass. And I thought of all the invisible threads that connect us, across generations, across mysteries, across the boundaries of what we can see and what we can only believe. Holmes played on, a melody soft and slow, like snow falling on still water. Outside, the city slept, wrapped in white and peace. Inside, the warmth held, and the silence was kind. And somewhere, in a place that was not a place, an old woman smiled and turned from a door that had finally been opened, knowing that her work was done, her duty fulfilled, her love passed on. The key would wait. The door would wait. And when the time came, as all times come, another Marlow would find her way home. The fire sighed. The music faded. And Baker Street, buried in snow and silence, dreamed of spring.